"What are you doing with that key, Mrs. Vale?" Vincent Moretti's voice cut through the upstairs hallway like a blade, because Juliet Vale had just slipped the old silver key into the lock of the room that still smelled faintly of lavender and dust, and the maid's little girl had stepped in front of the door with both hands spread wide, her small finger pointing straight at the brass nameplate that still read Grandma. Ella Hart's chin lifted, her mouth set in a line that was far too steady for a 9-year-old, while Juliet kept smiling that polished, bridal smile and said, "Vincent, darling, I was only looking for a place to put my things." But Vincent was no longer looking at her face. He had frozen on the spot because behind the half-open portrait frame at the end of the wall, a tiny green light blinked once, then again, and from somewhere inside the room came the faint crackle of his mother's voice saying, "If she comes back upstairs, don't let her touch the blue envelope." 3 hours earlier, the house had been quieter, almost ceremonial, with the smell of expensive flowers drifting through the marble foyer and the low hum of caterers moving like shadows under silver trays. But even then something had felt wrong to Vincent when he caught Juliet's perfume in the upstairs corridor before he saw her. Too sweet and too deliberate, like she had sprayed it to cover a different smell. Ella had been standing beside her mother near the service stair, clutching a rusted key on a faded string around her wrist, watching the hallway the way a child watches a fire she is not allowed to name. Claire Hart had told her to stay close and be polite, but Ella's eyes kept going back to the old door at the end of the hall, the one Grandma had always locked herself before anyone else woke up. When Juliet came up from the bedroom with a folded white cloth in her hand and said she was freshening the room, Ella had stared at the cloth, then at the wet mark on the floorboards beneath it, a dark little smear that looked like spilled water but smelled like bleach. Vincent had noticed that smell too, and that was the first thing that made him stop trusting the room's silence. Now, in the present, Juliet finally lowered her hand from the key and said softly, "Ella, sweetheart, this isn't your place." As if speaking gently could make the girl invisible. Ella did not move. She only reached up, caught the edge of Vincent's sleeve, and tugged once, hard enough to make him feel how much strength had gathered in that tiny hand. "She took the envelope," Ella said, and her voice was so quiet it forced everyone else in the hall to lean in. Juliet's smile faltered for less than a second. Vincent saw it. He saw her eyes flick toward the portrait, then toward the room, then back to Ella, as if she were counting exits. That was the second thing that made his stomach tighten, because Juliet had the face of someone who wanted to be believed before she wanted to be right. She took a slow breath and said, "I think the child is upset. Grief makes children imagine things." Claire started to speak, but stopped when Vincent raised one hand. He had learned in his world that people who lied best usually moved first to control the room, and Juliet was already doing exactly that. She was stepping half a pace toward the door, angling her body between Ella and the lock, smiling at the witnesses, acting as if she belonged there more than the dead woman whose name was still on the door. Ella looked up at Vincent, then at the blinking light behind the portrait, and added one sentence that made the whole hallway go still. "Grandma said if the room smells like bleach, somebody already came back for it." Vincent turned his head a fraction, just enough to catch the thin strip of white cloth in Juliet's hand, damp at one corner, and for the first time that morning he did not ask what was going on. He asked himself who had been in this room before he got there, what had been moved, and why his mother's voice was now trapped inside a wall. Vincent did not answer Juliet right away. He looked past her polished smile, past the damp white cloth in her hand, and at the little green light blinking behind the portrait frame as if it were trying to warn him in Morse code. Then he reached up, pressed 2 fingers against the edge of the frame and felt a narrow strip of warmth from the wall, almost like something had been opened and closed too recently. "Who went upstairs before I did?" he asked, his voice low enough that only the people nearest him could hear it. The hallway went quiet. Juliet's expression stayed soft, but the softness had turned thin. "No one important," she said, and then, as if realizing how that sounded, added with a small laugh, "Just the staff moving things around for the evening." Ella's eyes moved to the cloth again. The bleach smell was stronger now that no one was talking over it. It clung to the hem of Juliet's sleeve and to the polished wood near the door, sharp and wrong in a house that still smelled like flowers and wax and old money. Claire took one careful step forward, then stopped when Juliet glanced her way, not with anger, but with the calm look of someone who believed people in her path would eventually move. "Why does it smell like a cleaning closet in here?" Ella asked. She did not shout. She did not cry. She simply asked the question the adults were trying not to hear. Juliet bent her knees a little, bringing her face closer to the child's height, and said, "Because some rooms need to be refreshed, sweetheart. That's all." But Ella did not look convinced, and Vincent noticed that she was watching Juliet's hands more than her face. One hand held the damp cloth. The other was empty now, except for a tiny dark mark on the ring finger, as though she had recently touched ink or old paper. Vincent's gaze shifted to the side table where a silver tray sat untouched. On it was a coffee cup with a lipstick stain and another cup beside it, cold and half-finished, the kind of small domestic detail that did not belong in a room everyone claimed no one had entered. "2 cups," he said quietly. It was not an accusation yet. It was worse than that. It was a memory being sharpened into evidence. Juliet's eyes moved to the tray and back to him in less than a second. "The housekeeper brought one for me," she said, "and one for Claire when she came to help." Claire blinked. "I never came upstairs," she said. Her voice was calm, but her hands had tightened around the fabric of her skirt. The lie was not loud enough to break the room, only precise enough to pull it apart at the seams. Vincent took out his phone, raised it toward the tray, and snapped one photo without saying a word. That was all. No raised voice, no scene, no warning. But Juliet saw him do it, and for the first time her smile did not come back immediately. Ella noticed that too. She tugged lightly on Claire's sleeve and whispered, "She's been here twice." Claire looked down. "How do you know?" Ella's eyes stayed on Juliet's shoes. A pale dust ring clung to the edges, the kind that collected after someone had stood on the upstairs runner long enough to open a door and then come back out before anyone could ask why. "Because she walked on the old rug," Ella said. "The one Grandma never let anyone clean with the machine." Vincent stared at the girl. It was such a small detail, and yet it sat in the air with the weight of a locked drawer opening for the wrong person. He did not praise her. He did not comfort her. He only turned toward the end of the hall where the security panel was mounted inside the wall and asked the guard to pull the access log for the last 6 hours. The guard hesitated, then nodded. Juliet's voice remained perfectly polite. "Vincent, this is getting dramatic. We're all tired. The guests will be arriving." "Then they can wait," he said. The words were quiet, but they landed hard. The guard came back less than a minute later with a tablet in his hand, and Vincent took it without looking at Juliet. There was a gap in the hallway footage. For minutes missing. Right at the time Juliet said she had been freshening the room. Vincent did not react at first. He only stared at the blank section of the log, then at the damp cloth, then at the portrait, as if the wall itself had chosen sides. Ella saw the change in his face before anyone else did. She tightened her grip on the rusted key and said, almost under her breath, "Grandma said bad people always leave one small thing behind." Vincent lowered the tablet. On the screen, beside Juliet's name, a second access request appeared that had never been approved. It had no explanation attached, just a single line and a timestamp, and that tiny line, more than the missing footage, made the room go colder. Vincent kept staring at the tiny line on the tablet until the words stopped looking like numbers and started looking like a lie. The second access request had been approved at 2:13 a.m. for a staff card that should have been locked in the kitchen drawer, because Claire had been downstairs all night helping the caterers with the cold trays and the floral ice buckets. He looked up slowly, not at Juliet first, but at the service corridor door, where a faint scrape mark ran along the brass plate as if someone had used a card too many times in a hurry. "Whose badge is this?" he asked. His voice stayed even, but the hallway went tighter around it. Juliet's smile stayed in place for a second too long. "Probably housekeeping," she said, and then, too quickly, "There are always people moving around before guests arrive." She lifted her chin, adjusted the cuff of her sleeve, and for the first time that morning she did not look directly at Ella. Ella saw that immediately. Children noticed what adults hid in plain sight. She stepped closer to her mother and pointed at the damp cloth Juliet was still holding. "That's Grandma's polish rag," she said. "Not the cleaner's." Claire looked down at the cloth and then at Juliet's hand, where a pale silver line of old dust had settled into the skin near her thumb. Vincent saw it too. It was a tiny detail, almost nothing, but it belonged to the upstairs hall, not the guest bath, not the floral room, not anywhere Juliet had claimed to be. He took the tablet back and scrolled once more through the access log. The second approval had not come from housekeeping after all. It had come from a temporary credential registered to a name that had been entered, deleted, and entered again under a different extension. Vincent's jaw set, but he still did not raise his voice. "Run it again," he told the guard. The guard hesitated. Juliet turned her head toward him, soft and sweet. "Vincent, there's no need to make this ugly." "Then stop making it false," he said. Ella didn't flinch at the words. She was watching the name field on the tablet the way she watched the lock on Grandma's door. "It's not a real name," she murmured. Vincent looked down at her. "What did you say?" Ella pointed not to the screen itself but to the tiny blurred initials in the log. "That's not how Grandma wrote her staff notes," she said. "She always made the middle letter bigger." No one spoke. Claire's hand moved to cover her mouth before she caught herself. Juliet's fingers tightened around the cloth, then relaxed again, too carefully. Vincent scrolled back and saw it. The access entry had been corrected after the fact. Someone had edited the record, and the edit timestamp sat 3 minutes after the missing footage began. Not before. After. That meant the person who had been upstairs knew the camera gap existed before anyone else did. Vincent finally looked at Juliet, and this time she met his eyes for less than a second before glancing away toward the portrait. That was the smallest crack, but it was enough. He turned and asked the guard for the backup copy of the hallway footage, then asked for the original badge assignment list, then asked who had been near the upstairs runner with a cloth in their hand. Juliet gave a small, almost amused breath. "You're really going to let a child run your house?" she asked. Ella answered before Vincent could. "Grandma said the house tells on people when they touch the wrong thing." Her voice was so quiet that it made the words sharper. Vincent looked at the polished floorboards, then at the damp mark near the door, then at the edited access log, and he understood that the first clue had not been random at all. Somebody had planned the room, the timing, and the lie long before Ella ever put her hands on the door. Vincent did not raise his voice. He simply handed the tablet to the guard and said, "Pull the original badge assignment list, the backup hallway footage, and every access request from midnight to now." The guard nodded too quickly, which told Vincent the room was no longer under control, only pretending to be. Juliet stood near the door with her chin lifted and that same soft smile, the one that made every sentence sound reasonable even when it was not. "This is becoming a waste of everyone's time," she said. "If there was any issue upstairs, the staff would have reported it." Ella did not look at Juliet. She was staring at the old portrait across the hall, the one Grandma had always insisted faced the room at a slight angle. Vincent noticed the child's eyes narrowing, not with fear, but with memory. "What is it?" he asked. Ella took a small breath, reached into her pocket, and held up the rusted key without showing off, as if it were only another ordinary thing. "Grandma never kept secrets in drawers," she said. "She kept them behind things that watched the room." The line landed with a quietness that made the hallway feel smaller. Claire stepped closer to her daughter, not to stop her, but to steady herself. Juliet gave a little laugh that was almost kind. "Sweetheart, I'm sure you believe that." But Ella had already moved. She crossed the carpet in slow, careful steps, stopped in front of the portrait, and touched the edge of the frame where the wood met the wall. There was no dramatic sound, no hidden mechanism that belonged in a movie. Just a soft click, a small release, and the portrait shifted inward by less than an inch. The room went still, Vincent's gaze fixed on the narrow opening behind it. Tucked into the space was an old cassette recorder wrapped in a faded handkerchief and a hospital tag tied with a silver ribbon, both clean enough to tell him they had not been forgotten by accident. Juliet's smile held, but only barely. "That's impossible," she said, and the words came out too fast to be polished. Vincent looked at her once, then at the tag, then back at Ella. "How did you know that was there?" he asked. Ella did not puff up with pride. She simply answered the question that mattered. "Grandma let me dust the frame once," she said. "She said if anything changed, I'd notice first." A security woman near the end of the hall shifted her weight. One of the caterers stopped moving. Even Claire seemed to forget to breathe for a second. Vincent took the recorder out carefully, as though he were lifting something that could still speak. The tag was folded against it, and when he unfolded the ribbon, he saw the hospital name, the date, and a room number that matched the morning Grandma had supposedly been too tired to receive visitors. He turned the tag over and found a faint ink mark on the back, the kind made when a pen presses through paper during a rushed signature. Juliet's hand moved to her bracelet, then away from it, then back again. The movement was small, but Vincent saw it. He had watched enough liars, in business and in family, to know that people only touch the same place twice when their body has remembered a mistake before their mouth does. "Did you know this was here?" he asked. Juliet's reply came smooth enough to sound insulted. "Of course not. I haven't touched that wall." Ella looked up at him for the first time since entering the hall and said, "Then why does her perfume smell like the inside of Grandma's room?" The question was small, but it changed the air. Vincent had noticed it too. The floral scent in the hallway was not Grandma's lavender, soft and dry. It was Juliet's perfume, too sweet and newly applied, as if she had tried to cover a smell that came from bleach and paper and something older. Juliet's eyes flicked, just once, to the white cloth in her hand. She realized too late that Vincent had seen the same thing. He did not accuse her yet. He simply placed the recorder and hospital tag on the small hall table between them, where everyone could see them, and asked the guard to verify whether the portrait had been moved in the last hour. Juliet opened her mouth to answer for the guard, but the guard spoke first. "No, sir," he said. "Not by us. That was the mistake. Not the lie, but the timing of it." Vincent turned his head a fraction, just enough to see the damp edge of the cloth in Juliet's grip and the faint silver dust on her thumb. Someone had been in the wall before Ella ever touched it, and now Juliet knew she had lost the one advantage she could not afford to lose: the ability to keep the room looking untouched. Vincent did not touch the recorder with bare hands. He asked for a clean evidence bag, then watched the guard bring one from the security desk like they were suddenly in a different house now, one where even a hallway accident could become a legal problem. Ella stood beside Claire with her little fingers still wrapped around the rusted key, watching every movement with the same grave attention she had given the portrait. Juliet had gone quiet, which worried Vincent more than if she had spoken. Silence from a person like her was never empty. It was organized. He slipped the recorder into the open bag only long enough to check the cassette door, then set it down on the hall table beside the hospital tag. The ribbon had gone a little stiff with age, and when he turned the tag over, he saw a faint pharmacy stamp, the kind printed when a patient is moved from one floor to another in a hurry. That tiny stamp made something in his memory shift. Grandma had been in that hospital at the end. Juliet had been the one who said she would handle the paperwork. Vincent remembered that now with a cold, precise discomfort, because she had said it so smoothly, as if she were offering to bring tea. He took out his phone and snapped photos of both items, front and back, then sent them to his lawyer with one short message: "Preserve everything and confirm chain of custody before anyone else touches the room." Juliet's brows rose a fraction. "You're really treating this like evidence?" she asked, still polite, still polished, still acting as if the room belonged to the highest bidder and not the dead. Vincent did not answer her. He pressed play on the recorder instead. The first sound was static, thin and papery, then the faint hiss of a room with an open window. Grandma's voice came through damaged but recognizable, weaker than in the hallway and yet somehow sharper because of it. "If you found this, then someone came upstairs after I told them not to," she said, each word catching and recovering as if time itself had to make room for her. Ella's face changed at the sound of it. She did not cry. She leaned in closer, one shoulder touching Claire's arm, and listened like she was hearing a promise kept. The voice crackled again. Do not let them tell you I changed my mind. I signed once. I did not sign again. Vincent went still. Not because the words were dramatic. Because they were specific. Because they were legal. Because someone in this house had definitely been building a different version of that sentence for him to believe. The recording clicked, and for a second the speaker picked up another voice in the room. A woman's voice in the background, not clear enough to identify, but close enough to make the hair on Vincent's arms rise. The tape swallowed the rest into static. Juliet's perfume drifted through the hall again, too sweet and too strong, and Vincent suddenly remembered the hospital corridor. How she had worn the same scent that night when she told him his mother was too tired to review anything else until morning. He looked down at the hospital tag again. The date was the same week. The room number was the same floor. And there, in the corner, was a tiny notation from a ward clerk that matched a private transfer request he had never seen. "Play that part again," he said. The guard did not move. Vincent looked up. "Now." The tape wound back. The static returned, and Grandma's voice repeated the line about signing once. This time Vincent heard a softer rustle just after it, like paper being folded or slipped into a purse. He did not know yet what paper it was, but he knew what it meant. Someone had been in that room before Grandma died. Someone had heard the same warning and decided to ignore it. He turned off the recorder and, with the same steady hands he used when closing a business deal, sealed it back inside the evidence bag. Then he called for a copy of the hospital transfer records, the original access log, and every document Juliet had submitted on Grandma's behalf. Claire swallowed hard when she heard that, because she knew exactly what it meant. Vincent was no longer asking whether something was wrong. He was testing who had helped make it wrong. Ella, still quiet, lifted the rusted key and placed it on the table beside the recorder. Not as a toy, not as a keepsake, but as if she understood that each thing had to stand where it could be seen. Vincent looked at the key, then at the hospital tag, then at Juliet. Her smile was still there, but thinner now, stretched over. Something that had started to crack. And when he saw her fingers move once toward the bracelet on her wrist, the same nervous little motion she had made before the hallway footage, he knew the suspicion he had been trying to avoid had finally found a place to live. It was not the room. It was her. The house had gone quiet in the way expensive houses only did after midnight. When the staff had gone home, the guests had stopped laughing, and every little sound began to matter. In the kitchen below, the refrigerator hummed softly. Somewhere a spoon tapped once against a glass, then stopped. Rain pressed against the tall windows in thin, patient lines. Vincent stood at the end of the dark hallway with the recorder sealed in an evidence bag on the table beside him, listening to his own lawyer on speakerphone while Ella sat at the kitchen island with both hands around a mug of warm milk she had not asked for. "Do not let anyone touch the originals," the lawyer said. "Not Juliet, not staff, not even family. If there was a hospital transfer, I need the record, the authorizing name, and the timestamp." Vincent looked down at the hospital tag again, then at the copied access log, then at the tiny faded mark on the edge of the recorder bag where Grandma's initials had been written in pen so old it had browned with age. Ella did not drink the milk. She was watching him instead. "I don't want money," she said quietly. "I want them to stop saying Grandma changed her mind." Vincent lifted his eyes to her. She was small in the kitchen chair, small against the high-backed cabinets and the bright, polished counters, but the room seemed to have shrunk around her anyway. Claire stood beside the sink, tired and pale, her arms wrapped around herself as if the cold had followed them indoors. Vincent's lawyer came back on the line. "There's something else," he said. "The hospital tag matches a private transfer request, but the authorization signature wasn't entered from the hospital network. It was routed through a separate account." Vincent's gaze sharpened. "Whose?" A pause. Then, "Juliet Vale's," the lawyer said. No one moved. The rain kept tapping at the glass.
"Ellas fingers,"
tightened once around the mug. Claire looked at Vincent as if she had just watched a door lock from the inside. He did not speak right away. He picked up the hospital tag, flipped it over, and studied the tiny clerk notation again. Then he remembered Juliet standing in the upstairs hall with the damp cloth in her hand, her voice calm, her smile ready, her hand moving too quickly toward her bracelet whenever anything threatened to become factual. He remembered her saying the child was upset. He remembered how easily she had reached for explanations, as if every lie had already been rehearsed. "Send me the file," he said into the phone. "All of it. The transfer request, the access history, the probate note. Every version." The lawyer agreed and the call ended. Vincent did not sit down. He opened his laptop at the kitchen table, pulled up the old family attorney's contact sheet, and asked for the name of the man who had handled Grandma's will before he died. Claire answered before the search could finish. "Mr. Barlow," she said. Her voice was small. "He retired after the hospital stay." Vincent looked up. "Did he?" Claire nodded once, but not with confidence. "Not fully. That's what Juliet told us," she said. Ella finally set the mug down. "Grandma said he was scared," she murmured. Vincent turned to her. "Scared of what?" Ella thought for a second, then answered in the careful way children did when they were trying not to get something wrong. "Of the woman who kept coming upstairs after everyone else was asleep." Vincent went still. Not because he had not suspected Juliet. Because he had. Because now suspicion had turned into a shape, and that shape had been walking through his house wearing perfume and a polite smile while moving pieces no one had bothered to check. He opened the probate note again, scanned the signature line, and saw it this time. One page had a pressure mark that did not match the others. Someone had changed the document after it was signed. Someone had needed Grandma weak, tired, and off her floor to do it. The room did not get louder. It got colder. Vincent looked at Claire, then at Ella, then back at the laptop, and the realization landed in him slowly, like a heavy object sinking through water. He had trusted Juliet to help him protect his mother's final affairs, and in doing so he had left the door open long enough for her to rewrite them. Vincent did not confront Juliet the next morning. He let the house keep its polished lie a little longer while he stood in the breakfast room with the blinds half open and the law office folder spread beside a cold cup of coffee. On the other side of the table, Ella sat with her feet not quite touching the floor, watching him mark times on a notepad with the careful patience of someone who had learned adults often moved too fast to see what they were breaking. Claire moved quietly near the counter, folding and unfolding a dish towel she had not used, because the house felt different now, as if every room had begun listening back. Vincent closed the folder, then opened it again. "We do this clean," he said. "No shouting. No guessing. If she lies, I want her to do it where the camera can hear her." Ella looked up at him. "She always smiles when she's lying," she said. Vincent gave the smallest nod, not because it was funny, but because it was useful. The hallway camera had a blind spot near the portrait, but the side study did not. The kitchen had one too, unless someone had moved the standing lamp in front of it. He made a call, low and controlled, and had the staff bring the evening tea tray to the study later that afternoon, exactly the way Juliet had requested it the day before. Then he asked Claire, very gently, whether Grandma ever mentioned a blue envelope being moved after the hospital stay. Claire's eyes flicked once, then settled. "She said if anyone came looking for it, they would act polite first," she said. Vincent did not look away from her. And they would wear perfume that didn't belong in her room. That was enough. By noon, he had arranged the house the way a man arranges a trap he hopes never to use. The recorder remained sealed in evidence. The hospital tag stayed in the bag. A duplicate of the probate note lay face down on the study desk, with the pressure-marked page beneath it. The original blue envelope, still unopened, sat inside a plain legal pouch near the lamp where the camera could see it clearly. Ella had one job only. If Juliet came in, she was to look at the woman's hands and say the one thing children notice before anyone else. "Which hand opens doors?" Vincent had asked her. Ella had answered without hesitation. "The right one," she said, "but not when she's nervous." So they waited. The house held its breath with them. At 3:17, a phone vibrated on the desk and stopped. No one reached for it. At 3:19, Juliet appeared in the doorway of the study with a soft smile and a glass of water she had not been asked to bring. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. Her voice was calm, almost pleasant, and for a second she looked exactly like the woman the rest of the family had trusted before the house had started revealing itself. Vincent stood by the window, hands loose at his sides, his expression unreadable. "I wanted to ask you about Grandma's last papers," he said, "and the hospital transfer." Juliet's smile did not vanish. It simply became more careful. "Of course," she said. "I told you, I handled what needed handling." Ella did not move, but her eyes went to Juliet's right hand. The ring finger was bare, the bracelet was still there, and the perfume was there too much of it, as if she had just sprayed over a memory she thought would fade. Vincent nodded once toward the desk. "Then you won't mind showing us where the blue envelope was moved." Juliet's gaze drifted to the legal pouch on the desk and stopped. Just there. Not a full pause. Not enough for a careless person to notice. Enough for Vincent. He had placed the envelope pouch open by a 1/4 inch on purpose, with the duplicate page under it, and the camera aimed directly at the desk lamp. "I don't know what you mean," Juliet said. The lie came smooth, but her hand lifted, then stopped halfway to the water glass. Ella's voice was quiet from the chair. "That's the wrong hand," she said. Juliet turned her head. "Pardon." Ella looked straight at her. "You opened Grandma's door with your left hand last night." The room went still. Vincent did not look surprised. He looked certain, because Ella had been counting something no adult had bothered to count. The way Juliet moved when she thought nobody was watching. Juliet's smile thinned. "This is ridiculous." Vincent reached out and tapped the study lamp twice. The camera light above the shelf blinked, confirming it had been recording for the last 40 minutes. Juliet saw it then, really saw it, and for the first time since entering the room her eyes moved not to Vincent, but to the desk, the legal pouch, the envelope, and the duplicate page beneath it. She understood in a single breath that she had walked into a room built from her own habits. Vincent's voice stayed low. "Go ahead," he said. "Tell me again that you never touched the papers." Juliet held her glass without drinking. Her fingers tightened once, then loosened. Somewhere outside the study, a printer clicked to life as the copied access records finished loading. Juliet's eyes flicked toward the hallway, toward the study door, toward Ella. And in that small, involuntary glance, she realized the little girl had not been standing beside Vincent by accident. She had been there from the beginning, remembering every detail Juliet had hoped no child would notice. The trap had already closed, and she was the one inside it. Juliet's mouth opened, but no sound came out right away. The camera light above the shelf blinked once more, red and steady, and the printer in the hall kept feeding out pages as if the house itself had decided to speak in paper instead of words. Vincent did not move. He only reached for the legal pouch on the desk, slid out the original blue envelope, and then pulled the duplicate probate page from beneath it. For a long moment he looked at both pages as if he were seeing his own fingerprints on a blade. The copy looked clean, almost perfect, except for one pressure mark across the signature line and one date that had been shifted by a single day. Juliet had been counting on no one noticing that tiny difference. Ella noticed it first. She stepped down from the chair, crossed to the desk, and put one finger on the altered date without touching anything else. "Grandma never signed after the hospital," she said, softly. "She told me her hand hurt too much." That sentence landed harder than shouting would have. Vincent's face changed, not into anger, into something colder, something stripped clean. He looked at the hospital tag again, then at the transfer request his lawyer had flagged, then at the recording bag where Grandma's damaged voice had already said, "I signed once. I did not sign again." The recorder was still on the desk where he had left it, and he played the final 40 seconds with the room watching in silence. Grandma's voice crackled through, weak but undeniable. Then came the faint rustle, the paper sound, and a woman's voice in the background, too close to be a stranger, saying, "Just put it here. He won't check the floor change." Juliet's breathing shifted. It was tiny, but Vincent heard it. He had spent years hearing men lie in boardrooms and women lie in dining rooms and lawyers lie under fluorescent lights. This was different. This was the sound of someone realizing the hallway had ended. "Turn that off," Juliet said. But the request had no weight in it now. It was only fear trying to dress itself in manners. Vincent did not turn it off. Instead, he reached for the camera footage printout the guard had delivered minutes earlier and laid it beside the envelope. There was Juliet at 2:13 a.m., just as the study camera had caught her, moving down the hall with a folder pressed against her ribs and the same white cloth in her hand. There was the access log showing the second request under a temporary credential. There was the hospital transfer trail, routed through Juliet's separate account, with Grandma's initials copied into a field she should never have touched. Vincent stared at the page for a long time. Then he lifted his eyes not to Juliet, but to Claire, to Ella, to the evidence. Because the shame was not only that he had been lied to, it was that he had let the lie stand long enough to become policy. Juliet's voice tried to recover itself. "Vincent, I was helping you. Your mother was confused after the hospital." Ella turned to her before he could. "She wasn't confused," she said, and there was no anger in it, only certainty. "You were." Juliet flinched as if the child had struck a nerve with no hands at all. Vincent's jaw tightened. He took off his glasses, one slow motion at a time, and set them on the desk beside the envelope, then looked at the duplicate page again. His own signature was not on it, but his trust was. That was the real damage. He had signed over enough space, enough control, enough silence to let someone else rewrite what his mother had tried to protect. The room stayed still. Claire covered her mouth. The guard by the door looked down at the floor. Juliet's bracelet slipped slightly on her wrist, and she caught it too late. The same nervous motion Ella had noticed before. The same motion that now felt like a confession without words. Vincent finally spoke, and when he did, his voice was so calm it was worse than a shout. "You moved her papers," he said. "You altered the request. You used my mother's weakness to rewrite her will." Juliet shook her head once, but the movement was empty now. She had no room left to hide in. Vincent looked at the printer, at the camera, at the envelope, at the child who had stood in a hallway and remembered what adults had chosen to forget. Then he picked up the blue envelope, placed it flat in the center of the desk, and said to the attorney on speakerphone, "Call my attorney." The attorney arrived before dawn, and by the time the sky began to pale over the mansion, the blue envelope was already sealed inside a clear evidence sleeve on the desk, its edges marked, its contents logged, its chain of custody documented line by line. Vincent stood at the window with his glasses in one hand, listening while legal counsel read the findings back to him in a voice so even it sounded almost merciful. The hospital transfer request had been routed through Juliet's account, the probate page had been altered after Grandma's first signature, and the access log showed the same temporary credential that had opened the upstairs hall at 2:13 a.m. Juliet did not argue the way people do when they still think they can talk their way through a room. She only sat very still, her bracelet cold against her wrist, until the attorney finished, then asked for another copy as if one more paper could still change what had already been proven. Vincent did not answer her. He handed the blue envelope to the attorney and said to file it with the probate court, then told the guard to escort Juliet from the house and remove her access to every floor, every account, every record tied to Grandma's affairs. The humiliation was quiet, official, and complete. No one shouted. No one had to. The truth had become paperwork, and paperwork had become consequence. Claire stood near the doorway with her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles had gone white. Vincent turned to her first. "You were never the problem," he said. It was a small sentence, but Claire's face changed as if someone had finally opened a window in a room she had been told to breathe in. He told the lawyer to issue back pay for every unpaid hour Claire had worked during the weeks Juliet had been helping upstairs, and to add a written correction to the staff record stating that Claire had never tampered with any estate document. When Claire tried to speak, Vincent lifted a hand, not to stop her, but to make her stay in the moment long enough to feel it. "I know what I didn't see," he said quietly. "That will not stay buried now." Ella had been sitting in the kitchen with a blanket around her shoulders, watching everything with the exhausted calm of a child who had carried too much truth too early. She did not ask for rewards. She did not ask for the mansion or the money or the people who had lied to disappear forever. She only asked, in a very small voice, whether Grandma's room could stay Grandma's room. Vincent looked at her for a long second before nodding. By noon, the portrait was taken down and the wall behind it was checked again by the attorney and the family archivist. The recorder, still in its evidence bag, was copied for the file and then placed on the mantel beside Grandma's framed photograph, not as an object of spectacle but as proof that her voice had not been silenced after all. The hospital tag went into a locked archive envelope with the probate note and the access records, and the altered page was stamped in red for the court. Juliet's name came off the guest registry, off the upstairs access list, off the family office calendar, and off the morning's invitations. By afternoon she was gone, not as a dramatic figure disappearing into the rain, but as a woman escorted out by policy and evidence and the simple fact that the house no longer belonged to her version of the story. The lawyer arranged a safe apartment for Claire and Ella until the new legal protections were in place. He also arranged school enrollment for Ella, a proper seat at a proper desk, and a contact person who would not confuse a child's honesty with trouble. Claire was offered a position with formal hours, formal wages, and a written promise that no one upstairs would ever again be allowed to blur the line between staff and silence. Vincent signed the forms without delay. He signed them himself, not as a favor, as correction. Later, when the house had finally settled into a different kind of quiet, Ella stood by the dining room table in a clean blue sweater she had not owned that morning. A bowl of warm milk sat in front of her, and beside it was Grandma's photograph, set back into its frame where the light from the window could find it. Vincent came in, paused, and looked at the table as if he had only just learned how to see. Ella touched the rim of the bowl with one finger and then looked up at him. "She can rest now," she said. Vincent did not speak right away. When he did, his voice was rougher than he meant it to be. "Yes," he said, "because you made me listen." Ella nodded once, as if that was all she had ever wanted anyone to understand. Then she picked up the spoon, took one small sip, and the room stayed warm around them, not because the money was gone, but because the truth had finally been allowed to sit at the table.